Hey, cuz. Welcome to the very first episode of the Hey Cuz podcast. I am your host, Olivia J, and I'm excited you're here with me in this space where we talk about life, community, and all those everyday moments that connect us like family. Because in this space, as I said in the promo, either you're a real cousin or you're a play cousin. This first episode is a part of my series called Cuz Let Me Tell You. I got something to tell you. And today I'm going to address the fear that sometimes hold us back from doing something different or trying something new. As I said earlier, I want to talk about being afraid of trying to do something new. I would be remiss if I were not truthful that I am also talking about me in this moment. So let me get that out in the open right now. Being afraid of starting something or just beginning something, it makes me think about two of my favorite inventors in history. Two of some of my favorite inventors in history, and that would be Thomas Edison and Norman Lawson. Now, Thomas Edison, I'm sure you've heard of because there were a million things that he invented. Thomas Edison had more patents than just about anybody. I think that he was notable for having the most patents ever. The one thing that I appreciate about Thomas Edison's story is that he never quit. He never gave up. He wasn't afraid to try something again. And I will say that he said, quote, "I have not failed 10,000 times. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Likewise, with the inventor of WD-40, which is one of my favorite things to use. I always say that, if you want to get anything done, it's going to be WD-40, duct tape, zip ties, and Velcro. So now you know those are my favorite tool things to use. And we'll get to that in another podcast where I break apart how I really like building things. But for the purpose of this, Norman Lawson is the inventor of WD-40. And the formula that was the result of 40 attempts is what became known today as WD-40. And we don't know today what we would do without it if he hadn't tried those 40 times, right? So I often think of these two people whenever I start thinking about all the things that I do. And I have fun doing them, but sometimes people want to put you in a box. They want to pull you into the spaces where they're comfortable. I mean, it's bad enough that you tell your family and friends about your ideas that sometimes tank, and then you have to hear the quote, "I told you so," in so many cases where it applies, right? And if that's all you have to be concerned about, then you most certainly can move forward on whatever it is that you want to do because you haven't gone to them 10,000 times. My husband once told me a story about a man that he saw in a documentary who trained people how to jump out of planes or how to parachute from planes, but yet he himself had never done it. I want you to think about that for a moment. Just the fact that you may have something that you possess that others can benefit from, even though you've never ever done it yourself. Now, if there's nothing else that you can think of, how about giving advice? Have you ever given advice to somebody and not taken that advice for yourself? Of course you have, because I have. And the most comical thing about that is that you even sometimes wish that you could give yourself the advice back. Do you know why that is? That's because your advice is not for you, just like my advice is not for me necessarily. It's for somebody else. I sure hope that it's good advice that you are giving to somebody. I would hate to hear about you giving some bad advice to someone and they came back for more. But you know anyone like this? I can't seem to understand how someone can give good advice and take the bad advice for themselves. So there are two ways to look at it. But getting back to what we're talking about, let's take this podcast for example. I did as much research as I possibly could do before I started the podcast, as I mentioned before. I have done a radio syndication for 12 years. It's a weekly music show where I play music of artists and will commentate between sometimes the music and share the excitement that I have about music and others who have written it. As a songwriter, I completely understand that lane. It took me a while to realize as a songwriter that you actually are a poet because that's what writing songs is. It's poetry put to music. But there was a point that I had to get to even do that because prior to that, it was me producing my own music. And I remember exactly when I feared even doing that. There was a point where I was in the studio recording with other people and expecting and relying on them to have that. I got to a place where they no longer had what I needed. And the cost for me to get what I needed from them, it was too great to risk my own personal moral standards and other things. So it was in the beginning of a time period where creators, not like, creators now have all these easy templates and software and things like that to help them get things done. I was somewhere between that group of people from, the reel to reel analog to the ADAT tapes to the digital DAW, DAW, for those who don't understand, that's a digital audio workstation, much of what is creating the sound that you are hearing now. So it was in the beginning when creators were able to start writing and producing their own music because home studio software came out and you went to your favorite store and your favorite digital store provider and you bought it and you had this and you were at home and then you had help files because you didn't have YouTube and stuff like that to try and help you figure out how to do all of this stuff. That wasn't so popular. But I had to take a crash course in how to do and record home studios. So just like this podcast, I gathered all the materials that I needed, all the information, did the background research, etc., only to find that I had come to a point where I was stagnant and would not move. I started overwatching and over listening other musicians and how they edited and so on and so forth. And I knew that I had a certain quality of a vocal, but my strength as a musician playing the piano and other things were self taught and I was not on the level where others were. Then one day, I went to church and I was listening to my then pastor. I would love to name him here, but I don't want to bring embarrassment to him. But our daughter was not born yet at the time. So if he's listening, he knows exactly who he is. And he preached a sermon called Moses, What Do You Have in Your Hand? I always say that that was the moment that was life changing for me. The reason it was is because as a crafty person, which I am in my spare time, I'm a Tinkerbell. But in that moment, I started understanding that everything I needed, I already possessed. The only thing standing in my way was me. And I remember walking away from that lecture that day thinking to myself, I no longer care what other people think about how I sound. I know that I can sing. I may not play the piano as well, but my singing voice will overpower it, and I'm going to go forward with what I have in my hand. Little did I know that just cultivating that skill to produce my own music would help me produce an entire production of a radio show one day. Of course, we can't fast forward and see 10 or 20 years ahead of where we are now, but at each moment in our lives, we have these pivotal places. Some people call them crossroads, other people call them challenges. Whatever you call them, they are real. I'm in a real space today, transitioning into a new place, into new places in my life where my conversation is also a voice. I may not be singing a song, but it's the lyricist in me who understands the concept of communication with words. As fearful as it may be to sit in front of people and talk about the things that motivate or make me cringe, I have come to realize that this is a new season in my journey, in my musical journey. Getting back to the message I told you I heard about Moses, what's ironic about this moment for me today is what happened just last Sunday. My current pastor preached the same sermon. It was almost verbatim. In his sermon, when he made the quote that God said, "Moses, what do you have in your hand?" I was reminded that is a powerful message to anybody, anyone who wants to start afraid. I am sure, and yet again, at my crossroad in my artist career, I could not help but understand and believe that such a message was specifically for me. So, as a result, this week, I had the courage to move forward on this podcast. And with the help of listeners like you and other people who I subscribe to, I can go to another level and change my perspective about what it looks like along the way. Because the longer I sit and never share a thought or a podcast or an episode or anything of that nature, it's not going to benefit the world. We are to help one another grow and learn. That's what this whole space of content sharing should be and is about. And that's what I love about it most. When it's done right, it can really have an impact in our spaces. So, before ending, I'm going to ask you a question and present you a challenge. The question is, what advice would you give someone who told you they were afraid to do something? Think about it. And I want you to consider that this is not a young person, even though it can be, but think that maybe this is somebody who is middle aged and struggling with trying something new, like someone who has a career already and have established their space in the world. I want you to write that advice down or text it into a document or even record yourself saying as if you're talking to that person. And then I want you to read it back or listen back to yourself. And I want you to take your own advice. Remember, if it's bad advice, throw it in the trash. Don't give yourself bad advice and no one else, please, sir, ma'am. Thank you. By all means, be serious about it and consider your own advice. And don't forget to write yourself a letter about it. There's a question I always ask my friends or my family when they come to me and say, "Hey, can you help me with this or you can help me with that?" And if it's like an idea or something like that or a concept, the first thing I ask them is, "Well, did you write it down?" I write everything down. My family knows that I have notes on top of notes. I have notes in spaces in my cars. I have one of those chalk pens that you can write on any kind of blackboard or colored board with. I had my radio go out in my car and I wrote on the screen because it's like a dry erase. My husband said, "Did you I- is are you using that for a chalkboard?" So, if you write it down, and I hope you do, it's going to be the first way you overcome it. I'll tell you why I know this to be true. I've applied it in my life, and not only that, today's monologue was possible because I wrote it down. I had been spinning and spinning and spinning and trying to figure out when I was going to get this done. But when I read it back to myself, I had the courage to say it back to you. Be encouraged, everyone. That's it for this episode of Hey Cuz. Thank you so much for tuning in and starting this journey with me. Don't forget to follow, share, and leave your comments to let me know what you think. And remember, you're always family here, even if you're not a real cousin, you're a play cousin. So until next time, I am going to share a song with you that I wrote years ago. It's called When Love Calls Your Name. And I am sharing it with you because it is about the very message that we talked about today, and I hope you enjoy it. And until next time, bye, cuz. Thanks for tuning in to the Hey Cuz podcast with me, your host, Olivia J. And if you like this week's episode, then please like and share. But don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Or you can follow us on YouTube at Hey Cuz Podcast. That's with 2 Z's, Hey Cuz. Because that is how you encourage me to keep on going. Also, be sure to post your comments below. We read them.
When love calls your name, your life will never be the same. When love calls your name, you'll always find a way to stay. When love calls your name, you know it's going to be okay. When love calls your name, you will find a way. You start your life out one way, and then you end up another. It may be a tough one today, but in the end it's gonna be better. Hey, if you believe in real love, you can always make a change and live for something greater. Just laugh in the wind and find a new place. You can try love again. When love calls your name, your life will never be the same. When love calls your name, you'll always find a way to stay. When love calls your name, you know it's going to be okay. When love calls your name, you'll find a way. Tough love can get you down when you find yourself in the day. You wanna win, but you don't know how. So you wandering in the maze. Truth is, you gotta be sure that this time it is for real. You can have it all, but you gotta believe in second chances. Oh yes, don't give up on your dreams. No, 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 no. This is reality, baby. When love calls your name, your life will never be the same. When love calls your name, you always find a way to stay. When love calls your name, you know it's going to be okay. When love calls your name, you will find a way. Love's calling, love's calling, life will never be the same. Love's calling, love's calling, love's calling, find a way. Calling your name, you don't have to be okay. Always, you gotta find a way. It's calling your name, be the same. You will find a way to stay.